thanks, John. First, a couple words about myself so you know where I'm coming from. Director of Viticulture and Winemaking at Trefethen Family Vineyards. We're an estate winery, so we grow all the grapes that go into our own wines. Our vineyard is actually a little bit bigger than our winery, so I'm able to sell about 1/3 of our grapes each year, and I work with about a dozen other Napa area wineries. I think you're going to hear in what I'm about to say and what others have said before me that the focus here in Napa is really about quality. Every year that's the target. How can we make fantastic wine no matter the weather, no matter the pests, no matter what else comes our way? It's really that commitment that is a huge part of our success here in Napa. Certainly we benefit from the diversity of soils that we have, from the fantastic weather that no matter the vintage, it's not going to rain in June. It's not going to rain in July. We really have fantastic weather here, year in and year out. Certainly some cooler, some warmer. But we're blessed with our sites, with our terroir, but we're also blessed with a committed industry, committed to quality. And that is true, as John pointed out, starting in the dirt, starting with the growers, and all the way to the winery. And we're working together, and we're supported a lot. We're supported by the Ag Commissioner. His name was mentioned today. We work very closely with the local government. We're supported by industry organizations like Napa Valley Grape Growers, doing educational events about how do we produce this quality year in and year out. So really, to me, it's a fantastic place to work. It's like making movies in Hollywood or something. This is really where the action is. When we talk about a vintage to vintage variation, and we talk about the weather, the environmental variables, I guess there's two key parts. The moisture that we get in the winter and the temperatures that we get in the summer. And we go back and we look at the moisture. Our rainy season here is lasting anywhere from October, November through May or so. And we average on our ranch and in other parts of Napa around 32, 34 inches of rain. This year was a pretty good rainy season. We got about 95% of our average rainfall, which was very good. November, December were actually a little bit drier than usual. And we caught up in April. In April we had 3 times our normal rainfall. We had about 4.5 as opposed to 1.5 inches of rain. So we had some nice late season moisture. That's great for the vines. It's also great to get that moisture each year to recharge the aquifers. Up here in Napa, water is an important issue like it is elsewhere in the state. But to me it's interesting that we are sustaining ourselves locally with our water here. We're not, the water that we're putting on in our vines doesn't come from the delta. It doesn't come from snowmelt. A lot of it comes from right here, and a lot of it is groundwater. There's active groundwater monitoring going across Napa County, and we can look at the increase in vineyard development over the past decades and see that the groundwater level has been maintained. So we have a nice sustainable source. As long as we keep getting rain, we keep having water in the ground, and we're using less and less of it. As vineyard acreage has increased, the gallons per acre has decreased. We're very efficient in our farming. Grapes in general do not use nearly as much water as some other crops, and Napa-style farming uses even less. Part of that is because we have less grapes. We have lower yields than elsewhere in the state, which is again a reflection of our commitment to quality. So going back to this year at hand, we had a wetter year. That's good. The temperatures since then, and I'll get back to the moisture, the temperatures have been cool, and it started early in the season. It started in April. In April was a little bit cooler than usual, May as well. June was about average, July slightly cooler. So on our ranch, similar to other reports you've heard, we're probably 10 to 14 days behind, but it depends on the variety. And certainly our approach to this vintage, like in any other vintage, break down the vineyard into small pieces, farm those small pieces appropriately. Maybe they're different in soil type, maybe they're different in variety, maybe they're different in the eventual wine program that they're going to go to. As John pointed out, we have tools. So what are the tools we use this year to make sure that we get the quality that we want? Well, one of them is limiting the moisture available to the grapevines. If you have a wet spring, you have the potential to have an overactive canopy or, as David mentioned, larger berries. If you can limit the amount of water that's available to your grapevine, you can control the growth of the foliage and you can control the size of the berry, and you're going to have an effect on wine quality. Certainly the first time we try to control it is Mother Nature's water, the rain that comes down. And we at Trefethen, we use cover crops quite actively, and they have the ability to compete with the vines during the early season to take some of that water away. We also have vineyard drainage in our vineyard that physically lets the water run off underground. We actually catch that water. We put it in our reservoir, and then we spoon feed it back to the vines on our schedule later in the summer when we decide that they need it. So we take some of that early season moisture away during a wet spring, And then as far as irrigation goes, we only start it when it's absolutely necessary. And it's block by block, piece by piece. I totally sympathize with John's comments on they used to pick their estate at once and they broke it up into smaller pieces. We've done the same thing. When it comes to irrigation, we take our 440 acres on the valley floor and we divided it up into 121 different irrigation zones. That's like zones on your lawn, or you might have one for your bushes and one for your lawn, and they need different amounts of water. Well, I have 121 different valves that are on different irrigation plans, depending on what those vines need. Some of them so far this year have zero gallons. Others have 80 gallons. It really just depends on a number of variables that we're dealing with, but you're really trying to match the farming to the site. That's really critical. Why is it important to limit irrigation? Getting that water away will allow you smaller berries. It will reel in your canopy growth, which means you get more light landing on the fruit. You also get a lower disease pressure because you get more air going through there, and you help the vine transition. Sometimes I think there's too much emphasis placed on temperature, and if we were to look at degree days alone, it would give us a very different prediction for harvest date than if you count in the rest of this. And by that I mean you can force the vine to move through its cycle. You can, by cutting off water or by limiting water, it's going to stop growing leaves no matter the temperature. At this point in this vineyard and other vineyards around Napa, the canopies have shut down. You don't see long tendrils on the end. You don't see actively growing foliage. Once the vine starts shutting down foliage growth, it's ripening the fruit. And so you can force that to happen by limiting irrigation. One of the other tools we use is definitely canopy management. If you've limited the water but you still have a few more leaves than you would like in the fruit zone, you get in there and you remove leaves. This is standard practice in Napa year in and year out. Is it done the same every year? No. And in every block? No. It depends on the variety. I'm much more concerned about getting enough light on Cabernet than I am on Chardonnay. Because where we're growing these grapes, we're kind of on the warm side for Chardonnay. It ripens very easily. We're growing Cabernet in a cool site. I got to make sure I get more light on there. So again, it's variety specific. So you're going to control the water, you're going to control the canopy, the foliage, and you're going to control the fruit. Listening to Mary talk about crop loads, very important. If you have the same number of leaves but fewer clusters of grapes, it just got easier to ripen that fruit. And so what happens in a year like this, when you see that it's a cooler year, that you're starting out a little bit late, you start to play catch up. And you thin earlier and more aggressively so that you have more stuff on the ground and more early, and you've just caught yourself up a few days in terms of when you eventually pick those grapes. Those are a couple of the tools that we use, and certainly I agree that there's a lot left to see in terms of the season. Is it going to warm up? Where are we going to end up? Personally, I'm excited. I think that this kind of mild weather has been fantastic. Flavor really comes from calendar days, whereas sugar is more temperature driven, or what we call degree day driven. And so when you have a cool season like this, you're really hanging the fruit out there with nice intact chemistry, slowly building, and the flavors are definitely building. So I want to hang out there. It's nice. In a warmer year, I would try to slow it down. I'd be hanging more crop to try to slow down the ripening. And in a cool year, I put more crop on the ground to try to speed it up. That covers about my impressions of the vintage, and I think I got through that kind of quickly, but I'd be happy to take questions. I think we're going to open it up at this point.
Let's do.
Okay.